And we are coming on the air. It's exactly 7 o'clock, everyone, with our first of many cut-ins here on our online platforms. That is Facebook, YouTube, our app, and turn10.com. I'm Dan Janik, along with our colleagues Brian Crandall and Gabrielle Cracciolo. Sorry, Gabby. It's the first of a long night. Let's start with the polls closing. We have 1 hour till polls close in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. As I'm coming on line right now, I will tell you there are 248,044 people who have voted thus far. We're at about 59.6% overall with the early voters. So with that said, Brian Crandall is covering the Democrats for us tonight. He is at the Biltmore, now called the Graduate. And Brian, in terms of the local races, we're not expecting any surprises.
No, I would say if any of the Democrat incumbents running for Congress were to lose, that would be absolutely shocking and something nobody would have foreseen. We're tracking, there's a Senate race. Sheldon Whitehouse is seeking his fourth term, facing Patricia Morgan, a Republican, and two House races, Gabe Amo and Seth Magaziner. There was much more drama in those House races when those incumbents first ran. Seth Magaziner 2 years ago was in a tight, hotly contested race with Alan Fung in an open seat to replace Jim Langevin. And then last year, a special election was really hotly contested among Democrats in the primary with Gabe Amo coming out on top. But we're not expecting close races. Polls have all of them up by a significant amount. I would expect the conversation here in this room, the ballroom here at the Graduate tonight, once they come out with their victory speeches, to be talking more about what's happening on the national level and with the presidential race and control of the U.S. House and the U.S. As you can see behind me, it's pretty quiet. Not a lot of pomp and circumstance here. There's just some signs around, but we're expecting things to kick off as the polls close around 8 o'clock.
And Brian, before I get to Gabrielle, let me ask you a question here. Do you think at 11 o'clock, the room behind you is going to look similar, or maybe just a few people? Are they going to wait to see what happens in the presidential race? Because it could be a long night ahead.
Yeah, just from past experience, especially, I mean, if it looks like the presidential race might be coming to a conclusion, I would think people will stick around. But I'd be surprised if people hung around past 9:30, 10 o'clock if it's looking like a long night, because I think things on the local level will be wrapped up pretty soon. Again, I would think we'll be hearing from people somewhere between 8:15, 8:30, 8:45 at the latest. But we'll hear from people, I assume, like Governor Dan McKee, who's not on the ballot this year because it's not a gubernatorial election. And that's when you really, in Rhode Island, kind of see more of the action when there's a gubernatorial race or an open congressional seat, which again, we don't have this year. We have incumbents who are facing Republicans who, based on polling and what we expect, probably won't be very close.
And Brian, I'm assuming that everybody from the Democrats and their people are basically saying that they believe Kamala's going to win. That usually how it goes, right?
I think they're cautiously optimistic. I think if anybody says they know what's going to happen right now, I think they might be kidding themselves. There are quite a few of the Democrats who are going to be here who have spent a lot of time, especially in Pennsylvania. Lieutenant Governor Sabina Matos has been there quite a bit. Congressman Gabe Amo, again, he has his own race, but because that's not expected to be very close, he spent a lot of time in battleground Pennsylvania campaigning for Vice President Kamala Harris and her running mate Tim Walz. They've spent a lot of time there. And again, I think they may be cautiously optimistic, but I also think they may be expecting a long night and maybe a long few days.
Yeah, and Gabe, obviously, he had to do that commercial that we've seen air several times on Channel 10 with Senator Reid because his name recognition wasn't as high as they originally had thought, but it doesn't look like anyone knows his opponents, so we'll keep an eye on that. Okay, from the Graduate, we're going to go to the Warwick location where the Republicans are, and Gabrielle, just give us an idea of what's happening there and what we expect tonight.
Yeah, this is the Event Factory in Warwick, where the Republicans have been having their election night watch parties for the last couple of years. You can see they're all set up and ready to go. Doors should be opening in a couple of minutes. And it's really clear just looking around the room even that they are focused primarily on the presidential race. They have these Trump Vance stickers on all of the tables. They've got cutouts of the former president and his running mate on the stage, and there's Trump-themed drinks. A lot of that tonight, as Brian mentioned, the Republican candidates in these congressional races, really the underdogs. They've been outspent by the Democrat incumbents in those those races. And so there's not a lot of talk about that here. They're really focusing on the presidential race. And there's a lot of optimism here as well. A lot of energy in the room amongst the organizers as they're coming in, and people saying, they feel the energy throughout the day as they were going out to vote. And so they're hopeful, but they also don't expect results before midnight at the earliest. So it's unclear if we'll actually see any, positive results for them while this party is going on here tonight.
And Gabrielle, do you know who is lined up to speak there tonight? Are they going to kind of have a speaking engagement to go rah, rah, Trump?
So we're not quite sure of that yet. It's interesting to note not all of the Rhode Island Republicans are going to be at this main event. Patricia Morgan, who's running in that Senate race against incumbent Sheldon Whitehouse, she's having her own separate race. We also are seeing Ken Hopkins, the Republican mayor of Cranston, who's running for re-election. He's having his own events tonight as well. So we're not quite sure who's going to be speaking here tonight, of what those speeches might look like. But again, it is all centered around that presidential race.
Right. And Gabrielle, you mentioned that Patricia Morgan is not going to be there with you at the event factory. She's having her own party. Should we read into that? Is there any reason to read into that? Is there some behind the scenes politics as to why she's not with the party?
I'm not sure. That's been typical in the last couple of years. Brian mentioned when Seth Magaziner first ran against that race with Alan Fung. That was a very tight race. He also had his own separate watch party.
Do you want to jump online? We're doing a live stream right now.
We're doing this.
Do you want to make a surprise appearance? They're not expecting it.
Here, so it's unclear if that would happen.
Right here.
All right, we're going to hold you there, Gabrielle. We're going to go back to the graduate because Brian Crandall is actually. We were just talking about Patricia Morgan, and now we have her opponent, Senator Whitehouse. So, Brian, take it away.
Yeah, Senator Whitehouse just walked in the room here. We don't usually see from the candidates until after the polls are closed. You came in a little bit early. What are you expecting tonight?
So far, it looks like it's going to be a very good night for Democrats here in Rhode Island, and I'm starting to get the sense that it could be a very good night for Democrats across the country. If we see turnout and enthusiasm around the country the way we've seen it here in Rhode Island, we could be in for a very happy surprise.
Well, that's the thing. We're talking about the presidential race. How would you say it? Are you cautiously optimistic?
I'm
What's your
moving a
gut
little
right
bit
now?
past cautiously right now.
What's telling you that? Is it Pennsylvania? Is it something else?
It's a lot of it is just feel. A lot of it is just gut. A lot of it is just the tone of emails we're getting from other states. But I think the level of activity is very, very high. Lots of voters coming out, lots of response, lots of enthusiasm, and I think that means a good evening for Kamala Harris.
What do you think has maybe turned it that way in recent days?
Well, I think, she has ended her campaign on a very buoyant, cheerful, positive, inclusive note. And he kind of fell off the rails and became a little bit odd. And I think that makes a difference. Do they really want 4 more years of that? And then I think the abortion issue is going to play in a lot of states in a pretty big way. It's on the ballot in Florida, for instance, so it will draw out a lot of voters.
Do you have a concern about what could happen in the next few days? Either way this race goes in terms of what the response is from one side or the other.
I think there will be pockets of, infuriated frustration from people. But if you look at the times that Donald Trump has called people to come and raise hell outside of his criminal trials, for instance, and nobody shows up except the people like selling peanuts. So I've got a feeling that it's going to be highly localized if there are areas in which people exhibit a lot of frustration.
All right. Thanks for joining us, Senator. We'll catch up with you later on after
Brian.
the results come in.
See you later.
Okay. Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it. Well, that's as I said, there wasn't much happening here in the ballroom, and then the senator stepped right in a little bit early. Usually, you see the candidates themselves come in a little bit later on, especially as the party gets started. But you heard it there from the senator, and as I said, a lot of the elected officials here have spent time in some of those battleground states and maybe have their ear to what's happening. But we'll have to see.
Yeah, and Brian, that's a good point. Of course, who can turn down Brian Crandall for an interview, right? But it's certainly, when the candidates show up, they come to 10 because they want to be heard. I was going to ask you to ask a question, and Gabrielle, I want to have you weigh in too. The Democrats will say that the abortion issue is going to put them over the line, but some will also question whether or not the immigration issue is going to pull them back a little bit too.
Well, and I think, I was actually watching some of the NBC network coverage just a short time ago, and they did some exit polling. And at the top of the issues among the people they talked to who are voting today, it was the state of democracy at like 34%. But again, that depending on who you talk to, that may mean different things. The economy was a close second, as it almost always is one of the top issues. And then abortion and immigration were down. I think abortion was like 14%, immigration was 11%. So I think those are big issues for the respective parties and bases, depending on, which candidate you prefer. So I think each party plays to that issue, right? If you have heard from Republicans in the past few years, it's a lot about immigration, and on the Democrat side, they think they're going to turn the race on abortion and reproductive rights.
Yeah. Interesting that Senator Whitehouse had mentioned that he had a feeling. I mean, I get a feeling I'm going to win the lottery one day, but it's never going to probably happen. It's interesting that he's basing this on emails, et cetera. So something good to hold on that. Let's go back to the Republican Party in Warwick. Have you talked to anyone, Gabrielle? Are there people behind the scenes that have they feel like the big turnout is going to actually help Trump instead?
Yeah, there's kind of mixed feelings, a lot of that cautious optimism here. They don't expect results very early on. They focused a lot more on immigration and the economy as the big turning points. But we also heard from a lot of Republicans that this is the first time ever that they really wanted to go out and do the early voting and not just vote on election day. In the past, typically, more conservative voters have waited until election day to go vote. And there seems to have been a little bit of a change in that. People have been talking a lot here about just the energy leading up to election day with some long lines, early voting, and then just a lot of energy today. But there's a lot of unsure. People aren't sure how things are going to go, and they really don't think that there's going to be a result here anytime soon.
Yeah. What's interesting, if I can get both of your takes on this, Gabby, we'll stay with you since your screen is up. I early voted maybe 2 weeks ago. It was a breeze. My daughters voted today, and I thought it was going to be a lot of lines. And they're like, no, Dad, we went in and out. So I think early voting doesn't only help voters, it probably helps the candidates and the issues that they're pushing, Gabrielle.
Yeah, and when I voted this morning, it was probably 5 minutes total, in and out, no lines, none of that. So there's been a lot of mixed feelings here on what's better, early voting or not. If you voted, very early at the beginning of the early voting, and then some of the things that have happened in the last week in the campaign, you can't change your mind at that point. And so Republicans have pointed to that in the past as a deterrent for early voting, but people seem to not mind either way this time. And we've been hearing a mix of people who had lines today, people who had lines early voting. Some people had no problem early voting. It was in and out. And some people like myself today, in and out for voting on the day of.
Yeah. All right. And let's go to Brian Crandall. Brian, did you vote today or did you do early voting? And what was it like?
No, I voted today right around noontime. And my local polling place is a high school. The parking lot was busy, and I was expecting to wait in line for a while, but I got right through. So I think it was a steady stream of people who were voting. But, I know people who, again, voted 2 weeks ago. And I think in this, especially the presidential race, I think a lot of people's opinions were made quite a long time ago. And I think those are the people who probably voted early. I think the die was cast. I don't think there's a lot of ambiguity with most people in this race. With Donald Trump, I think people pretty much know where they stand and how they feel.
Right.
I think, the kind of X factor in this one was Kamala Harris being the Democratic nominee late in the game. But obviously that was still months ago. So, I think, the early voting and the mail voting just adds a different element to it. But again, it's not like they count those early. So we still have to wait till at least 8 o'clock.
Exactly. That's true, too. And we should point out right now it's about 62.1%. But yeah, this election really has become or could become the very next season of House of Cards, the way it unfolded. But of course, we'll see what Netflix does with that. In the meantime, Gabrielle Cracchiolo, Brian Crandall, just some of our team on the ground at the Republican and Democratic zones. We also have reporters all over the area. We'll see you on TV and online as we update you throughout the night. And of course, thank you for turning to 10.